Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 Prakim Rambam. We are starting Hilchos Trumos, Prakim Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. Perek Aleph is going to tell us the basics about Truma, the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael from which one must give Truma and Maasros Midai Raisa. We're going to learn about the unique din of Surya, and a big part of this chapter is going to deal with how the ownership of a goy will affect or will not affect the obligation of giving Trumas or Maasros. Let's begin. Hilchos Trumos, the Rambam writes as the intro, as the header, Yesh b'chlalim shmeina mitzvahs, shtay mitzvahs aseh u'b'sheish mitzvahs loisaseh v'zeh hu prater. Number 1, lahafrish truma gedola. And as we'll see, really, not only do we give truma, which is truma gedola, but the Levi gives from what the Levi receives 10%. That's called trumas meiser. All right. So there's truma gedola. Then lahafresh trumas meiser. We're going to actually see that it may even be given. It may be given by the original owner, thus relieving, so to say, from the Levi that obligation. It's not considered that the owner chapped away the mitzvah from the Levi. Number 3, shalayaktim trumas u'meiser zelozeh. But you should follow the proper seder. 4, shalayochal zor, a non-kohen should not eat truma. Number 5, shalayochal afilu toishev kohen. Toishev kohen here means an eved of a kohen, right? Or a worker, a schiroi, may not eat truma. Number 6, shalayochal orel, even if the orel is a kohen, he may not eat truma. Number 7, shalayochal kohen tamei truma. And the final 8, shalayochal chalala truma, as we'll define later here again, how does one become a halala? Nor may a halala consume any portion that has been sacrificed, that has been separated from the sacrifices to be given to the kohen that may not be consumed by a halala. Ubir mitzvahs elu, the prakim elu, starting with Perek Aleph. Perek Aleph is today's big chapter. Perek Aleph has 26 halachas. Some of it is very technical. So Kevin, get ready for your pictures. Halacha Aleph. Atrumas v'amaasros, beginning Einon Noihagos Minatoira Ella Be'eretz Yisrael. That's the beginning, right? And it's bound to the land of Israel biblically. Bein b'fnei habayis, bein shaloi b'fnei habayis. Let me just add a very important detail. Shaloi b'fnei habayis does not mean today. Elul Tavshin Pem Beis. Shaloi b'zman habayis is only when all of the Yidden live in the Holy Land. Okay. Point is, when that happens, it's not about the temple. The prophets added that even in the land of Babel, reason number 1 and reason number 2, that's why they added the din that Eretz Shinar, Babel's products have to be tithed. And I have to make a correction. Last week I said Chachamim Harishonim refers to prior to the Nevi'im. That was a mistake. Chachamim Harishonim refers to the Chachamim that follows the generation of Ezra. In other words, the beginning of that whole era of the Zugais, which led us into the era of the Tanoim. The Nevi'im were Bizman Bayis Rishon. The Chachamim Harishonim is Bizman Bayis Sheni. And even though the majority of the Yidden were not going there, but only for one of the 2 reasons, Eretz Yisrael. Now, Eretz Yisrael halacha beis v'amura b'chol makom hi ha'aratzos. It refers to the lands shekoivish oisam melech Yisrael that were conquered by a Jewish king, conquered by a Jewish judge, conquered by a Navi, with the consent of Roiv Yisrael. That is what we call kibush rabim. In other words, you have to begin with the following concept, that there is the land that was promised to us, which means that it's destined to be the land of the Jewish people. But prior to it being conquered, which is what happened at first under the leadership of Yeshua, it did not yet belong to us. So it's not about the land that was promised to us, but it's about the land that we conquered. And it was conquered again with the consent of the community. So it's called a it's called a conquest of the community. But if you have an individual Jew, not only one, even a clan, even if they conquered a part of land that was promised to Eretz Yisrael, on the level that it would obligate us to fulfill the mitzvahs that are unique to the land of Israel. Okay, now it's being that you have to have the involvement of the consent of all the Jewish people. Yeshua and his Bezdin divided all of the land, even though during the life of Yeshua it wasn't yet entirely conquered. Why did he do it? Because if he would not have made that division, which was done with the Bezdin, which was done with the consent of all, then later, when different Shvatim conquered additional little parts of the Holy Land, it would not have the status of bona fide Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael. On the category of kibush yachid, when later so you find something also amazing, that kibush, which normally means to conquer or the conquest, you can have the rabbin's consent now, and then when they conquer it, it can be hundreds of years later, it will give it the status of kibush rabbin. Halacha gimel. All of the land shekavish David chutz le'eretz Canaan. For example, areas that are known as Aram Narayim, Aram Tsoiva, Achlov, the Chayotze Behen. Even though David HaMelech was a Melech Yisrael, and even though David HaMelech did it by consulting the Beis Din HaGadol, nevertheless, it's not fully holy land, nor is it like Babel is chutz la'aretz, like Mitzrayim is chutz la'aretz. Elo yotzu michlal chutz la'aretz. They are elevated. They are removed from the status of chutz la'aretz, but they are not yet. The question is why? David HaMelech was doing things on behalf of, with the consent of, all of the Yidden. So the Rambam says here, there's another nuance. The seder of conquering all of these additional pieces of land are only halachically that powerful if it's done after all of the biblical Israel is conquered. What happened was David HaMelech still left certain parts that belong to the so-called 7 nations, leaving it in their possession. And however, if he would have changed that order, and then had David HaMelech conquered these lands, right? Aram Narayim, Aram Tsoiva, because he was acting on behalf of all. But since he went out of the order, it also is not considered bona fide Holy Land. And these lands that David HaMelech did conquer are called Surya. Halacha Dalid. Now, Surya, yesh devarim she'ibahem mamish ke'eretz Yisrael, yesh devarim she'ibahem ke'eretz Canaan. Let's come back to our topic. Koine bar karka is just like purchasing land in the Holy Land, le'inyan, trumais, umaisres, ushvi'is. As we'll see in a moment, more details about the Shemitah. V'hakol b'Surya b'divrei soifrim. However, min ha'Torah, we won't give kibush Surya the status of the Holy Land. And really, this is based on words that Chazal have, and that Rambam is paskening. It's called kibush yachid, lav shemei kibush. But midrabanan, you are obligated. And by the way, when we were learning last week about what tithings do we give in Eretz Shinar and also in Eretz Mitzrayim on the 7th year, so Danny asked over, why not? What about Surya? Here's your answer. In Surya, Shemitah is hefker. In other words, you don't give Meiser Ani nor Meiser Shady because you don't give any Tumas or Meisers. Halacha hey. Kol shechziku oilam Mitzrayim and v'neskadish kedusha d'shoina by conquest of Yeshua. What happened there was once Nebuchadnezzar Melech Babel exiled the Jewish people out of the Holy Land, that kedusha also left, departed. Batla kedushasim. Because the Rambam is paskening shekedusha rishoina. Since it was done exclusively through conquest, so conquest in, conquest out. Kitcher shaita, it was holy then, but the way kitcher asad lavi. We're not speaking about the unique status of Yerushalayim and Harabayis. We're speaking about the rest of Israel. However, Kivan Shalom Bnei Hagoyla, and when the Bnei Hagoyla went up in the era of Ezra, they took hold of, they made a chazaka of, they took possession of, not all of what we had before, but big parts of it. It was not done by conquest. It was done by settling. Now that has even a greater koyach of taking ownership. Kiddush is Kedusha Shniya, which stands forever, even though the Romans and later many other groups of Goyim temporarily exiled us out of the Holy Land. Yes, amazing. This just shows you that conquering something through a war is the weakest level of conquest. If you take it b'koyach, then you can lose it b'koyach. But settling is something much more powerful. Now, they left certain areas. By leaving those areas, they don't have Kedusha. Don't think since they were not re-imbued with Kedusha, they are completely chutz la'aretz. They're not. Which would have been the rule had they been like chutz la'aretz. Is all right. What they wanted was that, as we'll see, Shvius is noiheges bohen midrabanan. Nevertheless, as we'll see soon, Shvius is noiheges bohen on a rabbinic level, but you're chayiv in giving truma and meiser, including meiser ani. In other words, they purposefully left certain parts, and as we'll see, midrabanan, there has to be tithing given from there. The Rabbeinu Hakadosh hitir beishan ma'osim mekaymis shaloi yichziku bahen oili bavel. All right. In other words, he exempted those places from all obligations of trumas u'maises. And v'hu nimna al Ashkelon, he also said that Ashkelon should be exempted from maises. And as we'll see, because very few Yidden lived over there. Halacha Vav says that Rambam nimtza kol ha'olam le'inyan mitzvahs hatloyis ba'aretz. This is such a foundational rule. Is nechlak l'shloisha machloikas. We'll divide the whole world into three different areas: Eretz Yisrael, one status; Surya, and what we call Davar HaMelech's conquest; and the Chutz La'aretz. Now, in every category, you have subcategories. The category of Eretz Yisrael in itself, as we just explained, based on the Rambam's psak, that Kedusha Rishonim, Kitchel Shaita, Beloy Kitchel Asad Lavai, Nechlekes Lishnayim, Kol Shechziku, Oilei Babel, Chelik Echad, that has the highest level of Kedusha, that was re-imbued with Kedusha, that will be there forever, and Vahanishar Shechzika Oilem Mitzrayim Belvad, which was not resettled Bisman Ezra following in the Second Temple era. That's called Chelik Sheni. So we have that two subcategories. Chutz La'aretz is also divided into two subcategories. Eretz Mitzrayim and Shinoid and Amayno Moyav. HaMitzvahs Nahagos Behen Medivrei Seifrim Unavim. And then you have a Shar HaRatzos, which doesn't have any subcategories. It's just Chutz La'aretz. Ein Trumas U'Maisros Nahagos Behen. Halacha Zayin. Now, we need to have some maps. Pictures will be very helpful. You jumped ahead, Kevin. If you can take that pictures from the bottom of the page, that will be better. So guys, if you don't have a map in front of you, let's just read through the words over here. So we're going Mirekem. Where is Rekem? Rekem, very good. These boundaries are good. The map of the first conquest. So we went from east to west, from Ashkelon, which is south of Eretz Yisrael, until Akoi, which is all the way in the north. Now, you have these pictures here. I don't know why they didn't put Chsiv on the map, but Chsiv is further north from Akoi. Okay. Now, the point that we're going to make is one point, that the land was not consecrated all the way to the Mediterranean, that you will have a strip all the way on the westernmost part of the land that was not imbued then with Kedusha Sa'aretz. Kol Ha'aretz She'al Yaminai, if you're going north from Akoi further north, the land on your right, which is east, that was conquered. I'm sorry. And therefore, since it has the status of Chutz La'aretz, Temeyam, Mishum Eretz Ha'amim, that's a rule we have to remember that Chazal said that the Gush, and then later also the Avir of Chutz La'aretz imparts Tumah Midrabanan. Since also it's Chutz La'aretz, Upeturim and Amaiser and Ashvis, until you know for sure that that land is part of the Holy Land. And yes, the chayeves, the meiser of shvis, until you'll find out. Now, they came in. If you want to paint, if you want to put up the other picture in the bottom of the on top, that picture you put up first. That's the Rambam is trying to show you that if you're gonna not that one. There's another picture. So you go further up north, further up on the Chayenu. Anyways, the picture you put before that they put out here in the Chayenus is really positioned where east is on the top. And so here you go. So you have to flip that page. And the area E, whoever's looking at this picture, is Chutz La'aretz. What you're going to see from this picture is that the land, there's some parts that jut up. One side is the Eretz Yisrael, and one side is Chutz La'aretz, and then you go back into Eretz Yisrael. Other people have different girsas, not Samnun, but Amannum. Vilafnim Eretz Yisrael. Miturei Samnun Vilachutz Chutz La'aretz. V'hanisim Sheba. When it comes to the islands in the sea, from Turei Samnun v'ad Nachal Mitzrayim, anything that's in between this area, Menachut v'lafnim Eretz Yisrael, Menachut v'lachutz, both north and south, Chutz La'aretz. And here's the picture that the Rambam drew, the picture that you can see on the Chayenu. Just to know that the Aleph, guys, we're going north. In other words, you have to flip this. Yeah, if you would put the E on the top or the F on the top, that's going up north, then you would better appreciate. Right? The G and the H, that's the Mediterranean Sea. There we go. So it's amazing. So if you're looking, if you're going to the top, to the north of Israel, you see where the letter F is. The letter F, that is Kedusha Eretz Yisrael. But if you go further to the right, you'll see over here where the E is, that's Chutz La'aretz. But then if you go even further right, that's Vayter Eretz Yisrael. Oh, it's in the northern border of Eretz Yisrael. It like goes up and down. Some of it is Eretz Yisrael, some of it is not. Right. Halacha Ches. Which is really counts for nowadays, because like we mentioned, whatever was conquered when Yeshua let us in there, all of that Kedusha, other than Yerushalayim and Harabayis, other than that, it lost the Kedusha. So now it needed to be re-imbued with Kedusha from Oilei Bavel. So Mechsiv v'lefnim keneged ha-mizrach, u'mechsiv v'lachutz adamana, which again is the Umannoim or Samnun ba'ad hanar, v'nachal Mitzrayim, lo yichziku ba. Map is very good. Uchsiv atzma also lo yichziku ba. So as you can see, there's certainly a protrusion up into the north that was not reconquered or not resettled at the times of Ezra. Now, what is Surya? So he writes like this: Eretz Yisrael ulamata. Guys, the word ulamata, just when you're looking at a map, doesn't mean down south. Ulamata means out. From Eretz Yisrael and out of Israel, you have towards the direction of Aram Narayim and Aram Tzeva, Kol Yad Pras, all the way to Bavel, Kegoin, including Damascus, the Achlav, the Charan, Uminbug, the Chayoytze Behem, until the land of Shinar, Vitzahar. All of that is part of Surya. He did not put these names on the map over here. Abel Akoy Chutz La'aretz Ka'ashkelon. Amazing. And Vehem Tchumei Eretz Yisrael. Halacha Yud. Okay. So Atkan, the boundaries of Oilei Mitzrayim, the boundaries of Oilei Bavel, and as we mentioned, the lands that were not settled by Oilei Bavel, Middo Raisa, are not included in the dinim of Eretz Yisrael. Middo Raisa not included in the dinim of Trumas Omaisis. Now, for a big part of this Perek, we're going to learn about the effect that a goy will have if he will buy land, if he will buy produce, and a lot of details. Goy shekana karka be'eretz Yisrael. His power of ownership, loy hivkiya min mitzvahs. The land fully remains in the kedusha. Now, guys, a goy is not commanded to give trumas or maasros. We know that. But the key is that since the land, from our perspective, from the emes, remains holy, therefore, if a yid goes and repurchases the land from the goy, we don't view that parcel as a kibush yachid because you did it on your own. Yeah, you conquered with money. It doesn't make a difference. We don't say that. Ella, you just, you're now that it was always holy, now it's under ownership of a Jew. You're chayv in the mitzvahs. Ella mafresh trumas u'maasros, including bringing bikurim, and v'hakol min ha'torah ki ilu lo nimkar l'goy ma'olam. The yesh, however, kinyan lagoy shebesurya lahafkiya min ha'maasros u'min ha'shvius, as we'll learn soon. So that's one huge difference. It's in Surya, right? The lands that were conquered by David. The Rambam says there is no proper kedusha. Even though there is a rabbinic obligation to tithe, there it's different. The ownership of a guy will make a nafkamina. Now, there's a lot of details to that as we'll continue unpackaging this. Halacha Yudal. Peiros hagoy shegadlo b'karka. It grew on the land, not the Jew bought it back before the produce grew. The peiros grew while it belonged to the guy. Be'eretz Yisrael. Now, if it was fully finalized, which means not only did you remove all the clippers from the grain, but you smooth the pile. Now, the obligation to tithe is when you smooth the pile. No, it's b'shas the chiyuv or the chalois of the chiyuv. It was under the ownership of a guy. Going forward now, therefore, petur and miklum. The land is holy. The land is holy. But the Torah writes the gancha. Your grain, which comes to us, called the grain of a goy. However, if a Jew bought the product after it was already harvested, but prior to the Gemara Malachta no Gamna Yisrael, then chayovim bakoil min ha'torah. I want to say one very important detail. We'll get there later. We're learning Hilchas Maasros, Hilchas Trumos. We're not learning Hilchas Bikurim. I want you to know that if a Jew does not own the land, that will affect the dinim of bikurim. But the Rambam is not focused on that over here. In Halacha Yud, he mentioned that you bring bikurim because Halacha Yud was that the Jew bought back the land from the goy prior to anything growing from it. So when it grew on Jewish land. If it grew on goyish land, bikurim you're not going to bring. But coming back to our sugya, if the Jew bought it prior to the miruach, it's going to be chayv midoy rais and trumas u'maasros. However, still a detail. Since the land belonged to a goy, it grew and was harvested by a goy. So truma gedoyla has to be separated and given to a kohen. However, trumas maaser, the kedusha it's going to have. But the financial ownership, this is not something that has to be gifted to the kohen. So you will be allowed to sell it to the kohen. In other words, the owner, a Yisrael, a Levi may not eat it. That's the Kedusha part, Gavaldik. But the ownership, financially, it doesn't belong to the Kohen, therefore it's going to be sold to the Kohen. Similarly, the Ma'aser Ishain, which is only a financial obligation, does not have to be given to the Levi, remains to the owner. Because this person tells both the Levi and the Kohen regarding not the Truma Gedoyla, but regarding the Trumas Maaser. In other words, don't forget, had the guy completely done the meruach, right, there would be no obligation. It was already harvested by the guy. So therefore we say that mitzad, the kedusha of the product, it belongs to the kohen. The financial obligations no longer belong to anyone other than to the guy. And the Jew bought that from the guy, so the Jew gets to keep it. You can't eat truma, so sell it to a kohen. Where do we find in scripture to this differentiation? Because at the end of the day, like the Rambam writes, Truma Gedoyla, even here must be gifted to the kohen. From there, we Chazal learn Tevel she'ato lekeach mi Yisrael atam afresh mimenu trumas maaser, and that has to be gifted to the kohen. But Tevel that is bought from a guy, it grew on the land while it belonged to the guy. You don't have to gift it. but Kedusha has. So therefore, Lamachim Lakayin V'Lekeach Tomeh. Halacha Yud Beis. A guy sold only the produce while it's still connected to the earth. So until now, we learned about the meruach. Meruach, which is not only did you remove all of the klippas, husks, not only did you put it in a pile, but you smooth the pile. Now let's go to the beginning. When the product is growing, we learned in the whole previous series that any type of harvesting that's done prior to reaching even a third is b'chlal garnished. Remember, there's no chiyuv of peah, there's no chiyuv of leket. So that's going to be the oinas hamaisves. Did that product, while it's growing, reach a third of its ripeness or not will be key. If the guy sold you the produce prior to it reaching to this first stage, which is called the oinas hamaisves, which is as the third ready. In other words, you bought it prior to that. Even though the Jew did not buy the land, and the noisnin atrumas u'maisres laba olam, all of it, he has to give it. But if he sold it after it reached that phase, listen how cup over here. So like this, you do have to separate trumas meiser u'meiser. You know, it's not only the truma gedoyla will always be gifted to the kohen. Here, the trumas meiser, which is also going to the kohen, and the meiser rishon that's going to the Levi has to be separated, but it only has to be given to the kohen and to the Levi proportionally. There's a cheshbon here. What's the proportion? What's the cheshbon? Ketzad explains the Rambam. If you bought it after, it's still planted, but it's already reached, let's say it reached exactly a third. And let's say the Jew harvested it when now it grew the other 2/3. The Nigma of Yad Yisrael. Mafresh Trumos u'Maisres, as we'll explain, the percentages. Now, V'noisen Shnei Shlishi Ma'aser Levi, 2/3 of the Ma'aser Rishon. In other words, the part that grew while it belonged to the Jew has to be gifted to the Levi. And Ushnei Shlishi Trumas Ma'aser has to be gifted to the Kohen. But the first third that this product had the Metzias while it belonged to the Goy, that does not have to be gifted to them. So that is what you sell to them, Gavaldik. Halacha Yud Gimel. Yisrael shemachar peroisav legoy. The opposite. You have land, you have produce, you sold it to the Goy prior to it reaching this third. And under the ownership, not of the land, but of the produce, ugamara nagoy. Here the din is they're completely exempt from trumas u'maisres. Now, guys, obviously the Goy is not giving anything. It just means that if a Jew then bought it from the Goy, the Jew won't have to give anything. But if you only sold it to the Goy after it reached the third, or it was bigger than the third, even though it was completely Gomaran Hagoy, Chayavin Bakoil, Midivrayhem. We have to remember this. And the Goy was the one that made it into the smooth pile. Einam chayavin betrumas u'maisres elam midivrayim. Halacha Yudalot. Machar Goyli Yisrael Peres Mechubar. After they came to the oinas hamaisres, that is what we learned in Halacha Yud Beis. However, the Goy was the one that made the miruach. Yisrael, as we learned at the end of Yud Gimel, that when a Goy does the miruach, right, the chiyuv, if anything is only midrabanan. Here, there's something else. Here, it was sold to the Goy. So, einam chayavim betrumas u'maisres. It's double negative here. Number one, hoyu ba'loinas ha'maisres while they were in the Rishus HaGoy. Number two, the miruach was done by the Goy, even though it was on the property of the Yid. It's not even chayiv midrabanan if a Jew buys it from the Goy later. Halacha tezvav hakoinas ad basura. So here we're speaking about you purchased a field, the Jew purchased, and the Jew planted, as we mentioned, the chiyuv of trumas u'maisres basuriyas midevrayim. Okay, so you bought it and you planted it. Chayv trumas u'maisres midevrayim. Kamoishi is chayv b'natlein hakoyin b'Yerushalayim as we kamoishi b'yad. However, Aval, if you bought only the produce, from the goyim in Syria, not the land itself. Whether you bought it while they were still connected, whether you bought it after they were disconnected, even if you bought it prior to coming lo'inus hamaisis, which means it came lo'inus hamaisis only your ownership. Even if the Jew made the pile, see, since we're beginning with a much weaker chiyuv only with the rabbanon, they are exempt even from the rabbanon. Halacha tzai. Kana karka min hagoy b'Syria. While the payers are mechubarim, so I guess and you only bought it afterwards, then you are completely exempt. But if you bought it from the goy when it was so little that it didn't even reach a third, now chayiv la'aisa. Again, of course, midrabanan, everything is only midrabanan, but chayiv la'as. Halacha yudzai. Yisrael, now let's go to the din of an oris, sharecropper. Yisrael shaya oris l'goy basuria. Pay the same pturim in amaisnis, lefisha ein loy beguf akarka klum. And so what? The yesh l'goy kinyan b'sura lafkinim in amaisnis, as we said above. Only in Eretz Yisrael does the goy's ownership not remove any kedusha. Yes, in Syria. V'chein, all different types of agreements of how one will get paid, all when the land belonged to the goy. If you are a choyked, we'll explain this another time, or a makabel, or if you are rent the land from the goy in Syria, in all of these cases, you will always, that produce will be patim and atumas and menalisis. Halacha yudches. Yisrael shalakach b'Syria yasadim and agoy. If you bought the land prior to reaching a third, now you would be chayiv, but now but you resold it to a goy. When it reached oinas hamaises at that point in time, it was under Jewish ownership. So im chaz Yisrael lokach apam sheniya, yes, it is a chayv maises because sharein is chayv b'yad Yisrael. Halacha yutes Yisrael shoyel karka b'Syria. You own the land. The Yid owns the land. The guy is the one doing the work. The guy is the one that's going to take the produce and then have to give to the owner a certain part of it. The sholach loyaris peides here also at paturim. The emes is if you would know for sure that the peides that the others is sending you is taka from what grew on your land, you would be chayiv. Why are you pater? Because sha'ani oimer, maybe the guy bought it min hashuk. And by the way, a sharecropper has that right. I have to give, if I'm your sharecropper, let's say the agreement was I'm going to give the owner a third. It doesn't have to be from what grew. It can be, I can take all of what grew for myself and I can go to the market and buy the exact amount and give it to the owner. For there to be such a possibility. If you're growing something unique, so therefore we know that this did not come from the shuk, then you'll be chayiv. Now let's go into partnerships. Shutfus hagoy. Chayeves v'trumas u'maisvus. Ketzad. Yisrael and a goy that bought the land b'shutfus. Even if they already said, you know what? They saw the standing grain. This part will be mine and that part will be yours. Afilu cholku asad become us. No need to say if they made a division when things were already bundled up. What we say is, and this is even if shemercham hagoy. Obviously, we learned above that if the goy does the miruach, the chiv is only midrabanan. The point will be is that normally by dinei derabanan we say beredo. Like why don't we say they owned the land b'shutvis? The land, a product that grew on the land of the goy, that was harvested by the goy, right? That was meruach by the goy, will be exempt from trumas u'maisvus. But we don't say beredo. Even though in this case the chiyuv would only be midrabanan, but in Eretz Yisrael the general chiyuv is a chiyuv d'oraisa, and by isurei or chiyuvim by mitzvahs d'oraisa we paskin that we don't say beredo, we don't say retroactive clarification. That means every kelach has in it part Jewish ownership, and therefore a yid that buys that later will be chayv to type. That's only in the Holy Land, since the Iker Meister Shal Torah, and only by Dinei Torah, even if in this specific case there's only a rabbinic obligation, but it's based on a Chiyuv D'Oraisa, do we say Ein Bereira? And going back to this din, therefore we say that every kelach is viewed as tevel and chulin mixed together. To begin with, Meister Shal is Medevreim, Afilu Chalku Hagodish Chalkoi Shal Goy. Guys, Chalka Shagoy means that if a Jew buys later the Chalka Shel Goy, they'll be completely exempt. They won't even have to give him the Rabbanan Trumas U'Maises. Beautiful. Halacha Chav Beis. Peretz Eretz Yisrael. Guys, look at this din. Produce that grew in the Holy Land. Land belonged to the Jew harvested it, the Jew made Meruach. When you move it to Chutz La'aretz, you are exempt. Shiyatz L'Chutz La'aretz, they are exempt min hachala umin hatrumais umin ha'maisnes. Now, guys, I want to make this very clear. This is only if regarding maisnes, it left Eretz Yisrael prior to the Meruach. Once you made that smooth pile in Eretz Yisrael, you don't exempt anything by taking it out. The chalois of the chiyuv is by the Meruach. If you took it to Chutz La'aretz prior to the Meruach, by challah, it's another point. When are you chayiv to give challah? Only when you mix the flour and the water. So here also, here we're speaking about a scenario where you move the flour lechutz la'aretz prior to you making it into a dough. If you already mixed it with the water, you are megalgal it, then moving that product to chutz la'aretz has no effect. Okay. How do we know that a pasuk? Sheneman, as it says, Asher ani maybe eschem shama. The word shama is superfluous. Chazal learned shama atechayavim. But of chutz la'aretz, you are peturim. Since the chiyuv did not begin yet, the then chayavim b'divreim. Furthermore, the chayin paid is chutz la'aretz. The other direction that were brought into Eretz Yisrael. Now they were brought into Eretz Yisrael before the Meruach. Flour chutz la'aretz that was brought into Eretz Yisrael prior to you mixing it with water. It goes both ways. Chayavim b'chala. Shneimar shama shamat b'chayavim. Shavim, even though the product, whether it grew in the Holy Land, whether it grew out of Eretz Yisrael. Similarly, if again you brought this product lifnei hamiruach le'eretz Yisrael, and you did the gemar malacha in the Holy Land, then yes, chayavin b'maisra is midivrei halacha chav gimel afar chutz la'aretz. If you have earth that came from the chutz la'aretz that is in a boat. The boat is driving into the Holy Land. So look, listen to this. Here, if you remember the Sugi in the Gemara, we're speaking about a boat that's made out of wood. Of course, there is no nekev. The boat would sink. But we consider wood, interestingly, on one hand, it floats on the water, but it's considered porous concerning these dinim. And therefore, bisman sha'asvino goysheshes ba'aretz. There were certain boats, of course, not these big boats we have nowadays on Tafshon Peh Beis, but these little boats, these rowboats, these sailboats, that sometimes the waters were so shallow that the bottom of the boat would be resting on the seabed. Now, it already entered Eretz Yisrael, even though it's growing from earth on the bottom of the boat. You put in the ship, you put earth, and it's growing out of there. But it's yoinik from the ground underneath it. Therefore, harei hatzemeach b'chayiv b'trumas u'maisas b'shvis ketzemeach b'eretz Yisrael atzma. Wow, very similar to the din of atzot tzedakah. Halacha chavdalet. Another, these are the foundational rules. You have a tree, right? Perek Aleph, halacha chavdalet. Ilan shoymen b'chutz la'aretz. It's planted b'chutz la'aretz by the boundaries that we learned in the beginning of the chapter. But the branches or the foliage is noitem. It's leaning over the Holy Land. The opposite. How do you define the product of this tree? Here is one klal. You go after the roots, you go after the base. Now, what happens if it's half and half? Again, we just spoke about ein bereira. You mix a shirashas ba'aretz, or mix a shirashas b'chutz la'aretz. Even if there's some sort of natural barrier that is separating in between the sharashim under the ground. Therefore, one might have thought that some of the fruits are chayv, some of the fruits are pater. We don't do it that way. It's one tree. Even though only some of the roots are ba'aretz, we consider every peri to be a mixture of tevel, b'chulim, me'irav, and zebos, with all of the consequences. And that's again based on the principle that we don't say bereda retroactive clarification, paskins the Rambam, by anything that is mido eraisa, which is exactly what we're speaking about over here. Halacha chafei. Now let's go to the famous atzot tzedakah. So you have a flower pot. These flower pots were made out of cheres. the nekev, just on the size of a nekev is enough that a shoydish cotton of that plant would be able to go out through that hole. But shaloi yishrish. Shaloi just means that none of the roots went through the hole and planted themselves in the ground. It's all in the flower pot. Now, if the flower pot is ba'aretz and the foliage is leaning over the boundaries of chutz la'aretz, we just learned in halacha chavdala that hakoil hoilach achar ha'ikr. That's when it's planted in the ground. And even though we consider an atzitz nakav to be something that's deriving nourishment from the ground underneath it, but don't forget it's in a flower pot. Here it's getting its nourishment from the leaves. So here the opposite. Final halacha chavav. In other words, what we basically did is we gave the geography and the effectiveness of a goy's ownership, bein ba'aretz, bein b'surya, and finally, physically, if a tree is ahead and ahin, the roots, the leaves. Okay, halacha chavav. It's a very general statement that truma bizman hazeh, afilu b'makim shechziku oila bavel. Who the Rambam just paskin here, we say that their kedusha is forever. Even b'afilu b'mei Ezra, we would say that has the greatest amount of yeshivas Eretz Yisrael. Nevertheless, eino min haTorah ela midivrei. Very important klal. Why? She'ein lecha truma shel Torah ela be'Eretz Yisrael bilvad. Okay, that's number one. And yes, whatever Ezra settled is bona fide halachic Eretz Yisrael, but you have to have another condition. Ubizman shekol Yisrael sham. Now, guys, I want you to know the word kol Yisrael, of course, doesn't mean every single Jew. Can't be that. But if one Yid is making a trip overseas to collect some money for the moisness, no. Kol Yisrael means the vast majority of the Jewish people. Shenemar, as it says, Kisavoyu, Chazal say, right, Bias kulchem kishahoyu b'Yerusha Rishoina, and u'kamoy shehein nasidin liyos with Mashiach b'Yerusha Shlishis. That is where all of these chiyuvim go into effect. Mito Eiraisa, but v'loy kishahoyu b'Yerusha Sheniya, shayu b'mei Ezra. That was only Bias Mikzasan. The emphasis is not how we entered in one shot or not. That's something we're going to learn by Hilchas Chala, about the entry of. Here we're learning about who's currently settled. And therefore, since it's not Kol Yisrael, Loi Chiva Oisan Min HaTorah. But there's a foundational difference between product that grows in Eretz Yisrael, whom Bisman Hazeh, it's Chiv, is Midrabanan. Here it's in a place that is Machayev to Musomaisis. It's lacking the Kol Yisrael. A product that grows b'chutz la'aretz, just to make that clear, and not b'chutz la'aretz, we learned about the three chalukas, but whether it is be'eretz Mitzrayim or be'eretz Shinar and Ammon or Moav, right? Or, as we learned, the areas that were settled under Yeshua, but not resettled, they were conquered by Yeshua, but not resettled under Yemei Ezra, that's different. It's a different type of the Rabbanan. And the Rambam writes, that even though the pasuk that we are quoting is about Truma, that we juxtapose the same, we make a hekesh between Trumas and Maisres, Shuadim be Maisres, She'ein Chayav Be'em Zman Hazeh Ela Medivim Kitruma. Chevra Gavaldik, whoever's tuning in right now, it's the Seder is mamish breathtaking as always. Perek Beis, now we're going to learn what has to be tithed. We didn't address. We only addressed from where and who, if a guy owned it. And you know, not Shitas Rambam will generally be that what products have to be tithed. Min HaTorah, Dagon, which are the 5 grains, Tirosh ve'Yitzah. That's not the sheet of the Rambam. It's good to remember this. The Rambam holds that all payers, if they meet the three conditions that we'll have in the beginning of this chapter, all payers have to be tithed min HaTorah. Only vegetables, the Rambam, has to be tithed midrabanan. We're going to learn about various exceptions. We're going to learn about, like we said before, if the produce or the payers were harvested prior to it reaching Oinas HaMaisros prior to a third, like we learned in the previous segment of Peya and Leket and Shikhat, you don't have to leave it. Here also, it will not be chayiv. We're going to learn about how hefked is mafkia, the obligation to tithe it. But in general, the ikar will be that what is chayiv and what is not chayiv in Maisros. That's the topic of Perek Beis. Perek Beis has 17 halachas. Let's begin with halacha aleph. The Rambam is giving 3 prerequisites. Number 1, anything that's called oichel. When I say oichel, it means oichel adam, to exclude something that's meichel behema, and we'll see how your kavanah will make a big effect. There are many items that some people plant l'meichel adam, some people plant the same l'meichel behema, and the balabas's kavanah will affect the status. Number 2, hanishmar. Hanishmar means things that are not hefker, things that you guard afterwards. It's yours. And number 3, shegadul of mina aretz. As we keep on learning, kemeyin upitriyos, since their nourishment is not mina aretz, they're not mechuyev in trumas u'maisas. These are the 3 prerequisites. Now you see, you can argue when you read this, why would vegetables be exempt? We're going to learn soon in this Pedic that Rambam clearly has to state that vegetables only have to be tithe midrabanan. But very important, Shitas Rambam standalone, the koyach of the Rambam, is that everything other than vegetables, if it's oichel adam, nishmar, gedul of mina aretz, chayiv midoirais and trumos u'maisas. Again, we learned in the last chapter, this mancha kol Yisrael, and in the biblical boundaries of the Holy Land. Say that, but it's everything is mechoyt. Chayiv betruma. Umetzvas asay lahafish v'menu reishis lakoin. And the Shneimar, as it says, right in Shoftim, reishis digancha tiresh chav yitzarach. Even though the pasuk only says digancha, tiresh v'yitzar will be grapes and the olives. But the Rambam doesn't limit it to that. Titaloi. We expound, we're marbe. We say, ma dogan v'tirosh v'yitzar. Meichel adam, number 1, the gedul of mina aretz, and the yesh le'ba'alim, stam lahoyer, that the Rambam's seder here is not like he did in the first line of the Pedic. Obviously, there's a reason. I don't know the reason yet. Shneimar, as it says, or I knew it and I forgot it. The gancha, the af kol kayoytze behen chayev betruma b'chein b'maistes gevaldik. All that means all of the fruits, not only the dagan. Now, halacha beitz hakarshinim. Vetch. So here we go. Now we're going to go karshinim. Many people give it to animals. Afal pisha ena meichel adam. Nevertheless, look at this. When there is a famine, people eat it. No matter what your kavanah was, it never leaves the category of meichel adam. Now we're going to go on many technical things. If you have pictures, Kevin, that will be helpful. I have no idea what this is. Ezov is hisap. Hisap, I think I know what it is.
Sorry, driving.
Huh?
I'm driving.
You're driving. It's okay. No, but say that. And Koran is okay. Good luck, guys. So they're like this. If they were sown here, kavanah. If they were planted for human consumption, then however, if when you planted it, your intent was to give it to your behema, even if you changed your mind, and now while they are connected, another nuance. In other words, when did you have the kavanah? It's when you planted it. If later you change your mind, peturim, shemachshevas chibur, kavanah you have on something that is already connected, ein klum. If you are afraid of your own machshavas, connect yourself to God, then machshavas chibur is ein klum. Olu mei leim b'chatzah. What happens if you didn't plant it? They grew on their own, so to say. God planted it for you, right? Location. Then it's chayavim. Because what is normally planted in that location, since it's a guarded chatzer, stamel adam? If it's in a location that doesn't have a proper fence, why is that? Because that's normally not used for something that is of significance. Therefore, that in itself, logic. Halacha gimel. There are certain seeds of garden vegetables that are not eaten by no one, by nothing, like zeralefes, turnip seed, a radish seed, onion seed. In other words, it's not that if it's libehema, it's exempt. No. If it's meichel adam, it's mechuyev. If it's not meichel adam, that's it. Abel haketzaf, caraway seed, whatever that is chayev. But truma b'maised, because that is used for human consumption. Halacha dal tamare shel tilson, blossoms of tilson and mustard seed and white beans and
flax.
What's flax?
Beans.
Yeah, pull as beans. And v'tzaltzelev, here we go, capers, kafreis and shaltzelev, and caper bark are peturim because they're bechlal not called pri. That they're not called pri if they were planted for its seed. Avos rem liyarak, to eat them as a vegetable, chayav, intent. The chen abiyoy nois shaltzelet caper berries. We had this in brachas. We have these trees had all different types of parts, and they were all consumed. They're always considered a peri, and therefore the chayiv. Allah hey, kuzbar, coriander. If it was planted for its seed, then even the vegetable part is patim and trumah. If it was planted for vegetables, mafresh trumah maistis, min hayarak min hazera, from both. The chein hashavah says deal. If it was planted lezera yaraka pater, if liyazera liyarak, then not only do you have to take off the tithings from the yarak part, even from the seed part, because you planted this liyarak. However, in the sheves, there's something called zaydim. Zaydim are seed capsules. You need pictures for that. That will not be chayiv. If you planted it lizaydim, then not only mafresh trumo maislis and azera umin hayarak. V'chein hashechlayim wild cress. Gargir and shechlayim is normal cress. Gargir is wild cress. If they were planted lezera, the logic is very simple. Then misashlum lezera liyarak. And what does that mean? Kate said misashlum lezera liyarak. So I guess right away mafresh trumo maislis, and then you eat it. But and then right when you allow the plant to dry. And now you remove the seeds and you gather the seeds. Now you have to separate trumas from isis from the seeds themselves. So again, yirakis, you would argue, many yirakis are oichel adam, right? When they're not hefker, when they're nishman. The gedul of mina aretz, still the Rambam says Allah chavav hayirakis apapi shei meichel adam. Nevertheless, einam chayavim b'maislis elamid ivreim. Why? See, even the Rambam is also going to use the psukim that we quoted. Now we're not going to the pasuk in Shoiftim. The pasuk in Shoiftim is Reishis the Gan Chatirosh Chavitzara. That's an inclusive statement. Here we're quoting a pasuk from the A. You have to remember this. In the A it says Tvuas Zarecha. So that is a exclusionary statement. Chazal learned Tvua and something that's similar to Tvua, which excludes what? Vegetables. Aval hayirokos are not called Tvua. The Rambam writes that even though the pasuk in A is regarding maisres, as we had at the end of Perek Aleph, we make a hekesh between trumas and maisres. V'chein yerali shodim et truma. Why do we make this? Sharei nemer and shoiftim digan chatreish chavi yitzarecha. There it also says digan. So he writes kol ademel elu. What's doimel elu? The Rambam is holding. Well, digan has grains. Tereish chavi yitzarecha are fruits. Not them only, all of them. But aval trumas hayarak midivreim is just like Meiser that is Midivrei, even the Rambam. Halacha Zayin. Now we learned in the previous chapter that there are certain areas, bechutz la'aretz, not everywhere, certain areas, right? That's Mitzrayim, Eretz Shinar, Ammon and Moav, and the areas that were conquered by David and not resettled by Ezra, that they have a chiyuv midrabanan. There's no double drabanan. So he's saying, Ein mafrishin trumos u'maisim min hayarak bechutz la'aretz. I feel them in the last chapter. Another thing, Yarak that came with chutzlaris la'aretz. Now, guys, if you're bringing in vegetables with earth connected to it, that probably means that you plan to replant it in Israel, and you have earth around it because you want it to grow more, and it grew more in Eretz Yisrael. That's the pshat. That's the chiddush. Still, harei ze pater v'lo gazer olav. Because the ikir that came from outside of Israel. Hatfua v'hakitnis shazoram liyarak. Now, what would you think if you plant this liyarak? If you plant, guys, people mamash used to eat kernels of grain. It was like a vegetable. So do we say that your kavana was mafkia, the obligation biblically? No, it does not. Here we say batla daitel eitzel kolodem. Your intent is nullified. However, Yarak Shalahem Potter, right? The part of it that we call Yarak, we'll see soon. But the Ikir part, the grain part, I don't care that you plan to eat it, kernels. No, it's Tvua. Hazer Chayev Betrumais Umaisres. No, maybe the Rambam means, I have to know. Maybe the Rambam means that it's you batla daitel eitzel kolodem is only in part. Okay, we'll see soon. The Rambam will clarify this. Halacha ches. Hatil.
What does it mean? Sorry, It's not yet, but it.
Yeah. I'm saying wheat is tfuah. People normally take the grains and they make flour out of it. But if you planted your wheat field to eat the kernels, and that will be a yerik, and a yerik is only chayv midrabanan. So there's a butla daita. I don't think the butla daita means absolutely. I think it's a limited butla daita. Okay, halacha ches. We're going to come back to this. Hatilson, let's say Tilson is Fennu Greek. Not that it helped me, but whatever Tilson is. When it becomes hard, it's inedible. But since before it got hard, then it's considered a Michael Adam, and therefore it's a vegetable. No, it's not a vegetable. It's a seed. Very good, and that's why you're chayv shkoyach. Now that we clarified the obligations and that which is exempt, even from the categories that are obligated, it has to have an owner. So what will be exempted from all tithings? Leket, shikram, peyam, peret, voilis, everything we learned in the previous series. And even if the poor already put them in a grain heap prior to making it into a smooth one, because when they make it into a smooth pile, there is an inyan of marasayan only. Guys, goiden means not only is it in a heap, but you smooth it out. An observer might not know that this came from leket. That's only marasayan. Then hukful maisves, and therefore mafresh mehem trumus maisves. But if you made the goiden in the city, no one normally makes the smooth pile in the city. By the time it got to the city, everyone is going to know, the poor people schlepped it in there. So there's no more marasayin. Anything that came from that which was left for the poor is completely exempted from these obligations of Trumus Omaisis. Let's go further. Right? In other words, it was left by a goy. And we learned in the previous chapter that non-Jewish ownership of the land does not remove any kedusha, even though it grew, and not only a shlish, the last chapter, but it was harvested by the goy. Chayovin betrumais umaisris elam kein hifker. Wow. The cheinat fuah that didn't even reach the stage of shlish, and for whatever reason it was harvested. It's not called food. It's nothing. Now, how would you know? How would you know when you buy something? I mean, I know you buy that banana and it's green, it's not that ripe. But how would you know when it comes to this that it was harvested so early on that it didn't even reach a third? The Rambam gives a simple cloud. Any product that if you were to plant it, its seed is powerful enough to germinate, right, to create offspring, means that itself reached at least a shlish. If you would not even reach a third, you would have no koyach l'doir v'doir to go to the next generation. Garnish with garnish. It's not truma. And Azar is allowed to eat it, even post facto. Halacha 11, Pedig Beis 11. How good is this? Another rule: any product that's declared ownerless is exempt from trumus u'maisvus. Even afilu ifkiru hagoy. If the land is hefker, now guys, I want you to know, in Hilchas Kinyanim, if some property is ownerless, one of the ways of acquiring it is by planting on it. That's not the case here. Then it's no longer hefker. If your intent was to acquire it through Zeriah, you'll be koined. That's not the case. I don't want to be koined the land. I don't want the land. I just want to plant here. The din is, the product is nishmar. The product is mine. Chayev b'trumas u'maisvus. Halacha Yud Beis. Hifker kama v'zachava. They're standing grain. You're mafked it, right? Hefker is moitziyim idei maisis. And then you reacquired it. V'avar v'hifker shvimena truma post facto, even though you should be exempt simply because there was a time when it was mufkar. Now that you declared it truma, it is truma. Aval, if you were mafked, not the standing grain, but grain that was already cut off the ground, and then you reacquired it, you understand the difference? So it's here at least you reacquired it when it was still Mechubal Karka. Here it's only Shemal, and even post facto ain't a truma. Guys, I mean, we're running through this, but every din is so foundational. The Varim Most people don't sow them in their gardens or in their fields. Ella, the presumption is that they grew, no one plants it. So where did it come from? That's what God made the world. Many things just grow spontaneously. So the presumption is chaskasim and a hefker. Can you rely on these chazakas? Yes, you could. You are allowed to buy this product and not to tithe it. For example, shum bal bechi. There's garlic that's so sharp when you eat it, you cry. People don't want garlic that heavy. If it's in the market, it's because it grew a hefker. Or a certain type of onion. Or certain things that are very difficult to eat. Or goddess hakilki, Sicilian beans, Egyptian lentils. Where's the chefs? Where's tzemach? All these things, we can have a chazak and no one planted them. And therefore, if you found it, it was grew from hefker. Anything that grows from hefker, we learned is exempt from trumas u'maisvus. Halacha yud gimel. Mixtures. What happens if it got mixed? For example, zeise nikov, this is a very unusual expression. Zeise nikov, litaich means olives that were gathered by the poor. The word nikov means poor, and masik means a balabas. We just said that anything that was a matnas aniyim is exempt. So you had olives and olives. We're not speaking about the ratio, whatever the ratio was, and now you made oil. The point here is that it's not individual olives, but the liquid gets fully mixed up together. Or similarly, the anavim from underdeveloped clusters, which we learned in the previous segment, must be left for the poor. And now you liquefied it and made it into wine. The wine got mixed up together. So what do you do? So you have to give on that. But from where do you give it? You take a similar oil or wine. What was the proportion? In here I have a liter. I know that around 40% of this liter was from the balabas. Okay, so make that cheshbon. Mafresh truma utrumas meiser al hakoil. Wow. Ucheilu hakoil chayiv betruma. Here you have to give everything. So here again, like we had in the previous chapter, truma gedol is one thing, but when it comes to Ma'aser Rishon, again, I'm separate. Here I'm allowed to do the proportion. From here, okay. How do how do I give it to him? If I have to give 10%, but in this 10%, let's say half of it is a mixture, I get the money for the labor for that half. And I don't have to give him, it's if I would have something else, I would only separate 10% on the proportion of, here I only have this. So the Truma Gedoyle, you have to give the whole 2%. That's the Chiddush. Trumas Meiser and Meiser Rishon can be given according to proportion. You're obligated to give Truma to a kohen, whether it's Tamei, whether it's Tar. Guys, Truma, that's Tameya, is something a kohen may not eat. A kohen is allowed to derive benefit. So there's value. Even though it has to be burnt, so what? He can get benefit from it being burnt. He can cook food on it. He can warm up his house from it. And even if the Tuma began already in the Dagon or the Tirosh, I don't care when it became Tuma. And you have to give it to the Kohen. In the plural. Why is it in plural? Can be eaten by a Kohen. Tameya, since it's not Asur Bahana, it will be the Kohen that gets to derive Hana from burning it. For example, if it's oil, people, that was the electricity. You want to light candles, you lit it in oil. If it was Dagan, what are you going to do with Dagan? You're not going to make a Shabbos candle out of Dagan. Seder, you can warm up your oven with the Dagan. That's the Kohen's ownership and his Hana. Halacha 15. The Chen Trumas Meiser, Im Nitmeis, or in Nitmaha Meiser, still Mafrish and Oyser Betuma, and it has to be gifted to the Kohen for the Kohen to be the one having benefit from its Sreifam. Halacha Tezayin, Mchalam Afresh Truma Gedoyla. Trumas Meiser, since you're fulfilling a mitzvah, you have to make a bracha prior, as you make a bracha before all the mitzvahs, as we learned in Hilchos Brachos. I know there are exceptions, but that's the rule. You mevarach oiver la'aseh yason. Final halacha Yud Zayin. Ein moitziin truma me'ha'aretz l'chutz la'aretz. Guys, the sages made a decree. First, Gush Eretz Yisrael. Then they made Avid Eretz Ha'amim have tuma. I'm not allowed to make truma impure. So, which is why I'm not allowed to take truma from Eretz Yisrael to bring it outside. And even if the truma in the Holy Land is already tamei, so you can argue it's tamei anyway. That's called one of the milas, one of the stringencies they make regarding truma. You could say logically, what are you doing? You're not making it worse. It's tamei midoiraisa. Gush Eretz Ha'amim is only midrabanan. You can't take it out of Israel. Another thing, you're not allowed to bring truma from Chutz La'aretz into Eretz Yisrael. Why not? I'll tell you why. Because it's tamei midrabanan. You understand? You're going to mix it with trumas Eretz Yisrael. You're going to make a confusion. In this rabbinic truma called Eretz Ha'amim. Now, here's the catch. When something is tamei min ha'Torah, what do you do with it? You burn it. Great. And you can have hana from the fuel. If something is tamei only on the level of rabbinic law, you may not burn it because midoiraisa, you're being mavaza the truma. What should you do with it? You can't burn it. You have to be toy. You have to wait until when it becomes a tamei. On the other hand, don't bring it back to don't bring it back to Chutz La'aretz. People don't know where it originated from. So you're almost stuck with it. What do? You leave it either until when it becomes for sure tamei, or if this is chametz, you wait until Erev Pesach comes, and here you burn it with the rest of the chametz. Final chapter, Perek Gimel. Now we're going to learn about the shiurim. And interestingly, we know this, we should know this, that biblically there's no shiur by truma. The smallest kernel is a fulfillment of your obligation. Chazal gave the 3 shiurim, one of 40, one of 50, one of 60. Truma should not be separated with precision. Should not. Unlike Maisres, what are we saying? Pirkei Avos, al tarbela aser umados. We're not allowed to give Maiser by estimation. Maiser, and therefore Maiser and Maiser has to be given exact. Unlike Truma. Okay, now we're going to learn about Mukaf. Mukaf means that if I'm giving Truma from one on the other, so even when you are allowed to do it, ideally they should be in close proximation. And we're going to define in halacha the meaning of close proximation. We got to get moving. Perek Gimel has 24 halachas. We are still in the beginning. Whatever we're learning now is mamish the yesodus of the dinam of trumas. May we all merit to fulfill these mitzvahs in our days. Amen. Halacha al truma gedolim. First truma, which is what is separated to be gifted to a kohen that has kedusha. All right, mamish. There is no minimum amount, as it says in Parsha Shoftim. That's the pasuk we keep on going back to, where God says the beginning, the first of your grain. What does the first of your grain mean? If I have a field long with the goals, I have a field that's miles long, and I gave one little kernel, that's the beginning. The beginning is the beginning. What did the Chinese say? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. You began. Kolshu. And therefore, afilu chita achas, even one kernel is the full, complete obligation of the entire pile. However, the sages did give a minimum amount. Because everything is tamei, now we can go back to the biblical law, which is giving the most minute amount, because whatever you will separate nowadays, anyways, you'll have to burn. So it's like you're ruining it. All right, what's the siman? How do you spell siman? Samach mem nun. That's it. The siman is the siman. 60, 40, or 50. How great is that? Halacha base. If you have a generous eye, 1 of 40. Habenan is 1 out of 50, or in English, 2%. 1 out of 50 is 2 out of 100. That's called 2%. Ayin ra, stingy, echos mishishim. And the Rambam writes, lo yitchos me'echad mishishim. Where do we have the shishim? We just had the shishim last week when it comes to the minimum amount of payah. All right, halacha gimel. Kol truma she'enak yana makvinim olah. It's not important. It's an insignificant product. For example, the truma that you give off charuvim. All right, carobs. Today, we're living in a time everything becomes a superfood. Just they go through a cycle. If they're going to make a chor of something, wow, then it's going to become choshev. But when you're living at a time that charuvim is garnished. And kilisin. Kilisin means, I have no idea what this is. So since it's not chashuv, even if you're not stingy, you can give 1 out of 60 because the kohen doesn't care for it either. Another thing, the elu nitolim echad mishishim, truma gedulei truma, guys. Every line here is a mountain. If I have truma and I planted the truma itself. So the din is going to be that what you separate from that can only be 1 of a 60. Does not need to be more than that. Now let me explain to you something. What's the status of something that grows from truma? Do you know what the status is? Midrabanan, it can only be eaten by a kohen. You don't have to give it all to the kohen. So you get to sell to him that product. Truma has a much lower market value, demand, right? Supply. Since few people can eat truma, there's lesser of a demand, it's cheaper. So if anything that grows from truma, midrabanan, we don't say since the product rotted in the ground and now it's like a new product. So since anyways the coin is benefiting from it, aside of that, you have to also be mafresh truma and gift that to the coin. That can be only 1 from 60. Number 2, eruve truma. Eruve truma is that if you have a mixture of truma that falls into tevel. So you know what the halacha was going to be? Even when there's bittul, David, even when there's bittul, so let's say 1 fell into 100 or more, even though it's batal, but if it's, I have to remove that amount and give it to a kohen. Now here's the catch. Since I'm removing something from this barrel, giving it to a kohen, and biblically, even a kol shehu is considered a proper separation, even though I have to separate again truma from the remaining, here also you can only give 1 of 60. Another din is truma temeya that became tamei ba'oinus or b'shgaga. Even though we learned in the previous chapter, you have to give it to a kohen, but anyways, the kohen is going to burn it. These are all the cases where even the generous could give the minimum amount, the rabbinic minimum amount, 1 out of 60.
Not allowed to give more than 1 out of 60.
Not with the Rabbanan, very good. Or Trumas Hegdish. Now I want to tell you what it is. If you consecrate your tevel after the miruach, if you consecrate your tevel before the miruach, there's no chiyuv of taking off Trumas Omaisis. But if you made the smooth pile, so the chiyuv was chal, even though you're magdash it now, it has to be tithed. But who's losing, so to say? It's being taken from Hegdish, only 1 out of 60. Trumas chutz la'aretz, which to begin with is only midrabanan. Trumas haketzach, again, I don't know what ketzach is. Or kelisin, charuvim, these are all products that are not that important. V'hagim ziyois, v'haturmoisim, usoidem adoimis. These are not valuable products. 1 out of 60. Peretz, otzitz, she'eino nakuf, only midrabanan. Tzechenu apitrupsin, if they are separating from that which belongs to orphans, always meaning minor orphans, here even the generous can give only 1 out of 60. Halacha 4, ain't time in trumazu. Trumazu is truma gedoyla. It dafke should not be given with precision, not with a measure, not with a scale, not by number, because the Torah doesn't write a limit. So even though the sages said siman, we have to remember that biblically there is no amount, even 1 kernel for the whole pile. How do you remember that? By not giving it with precision. You make an estimation. It looks like 2%. You could separate truma from produce that was measured, from produce that was weighed or counted. Doesn't matter how you got to that pile of produce. It doesn't only refer to a pile. But when you separate from it, it should be dafka by estimation. Now, v'lo yitram, therefore, don't separate by using a basket, using a box, because the baskets and boxes that they had then were a specific measure. So you know exactly, like, I'm going to take a liter bottle and take out wine to the coin. Don't do that. But you can take half. You know why? Because when you take half of a basket, it's not exactly half. Or a third. The only thing is that the measure of a saw, since it was common for people to fill up half of that measure, it becomes like a standalone measure. If you separated the larger amount that you needed to, as long as you left over something, that which you separated is truma. If a person says, that's not called truma. Truma means a separation. You know what a separation means? That there's going to be two parts. Separation doesn't mean all of it. Now, now that we said you can add 1 out of 10, my friends, it's 10%. How much do you have to give? 2%. But you can give more. So if you intended to give 10%, but what came into your hand, the lesser amount? Now, was that lesser amount in your intent? Sure, it was. It was that plus, but that was your kavanah. So then truma say truma. Let's go in the opposite direction. If your intention was to give echad mishishim, and it came into your hand, what actually happened was a larger amount, guys. Einoi truma. That's very important. Your machshava has to be in the skaima. Now, halacha vav hamafresh truma. But also biyadoi afilu echad me'esrim. Truma say truma. Taram v'alsa biyadoi echad meshishim. And then you went ahead v'chazar v'hoisev l'shem truma. Since what came in your hand was enough, so now what you are adding, you didn't have an intent prior to how much. You didn't have it. You stam or mafresh. So what you added is not real truma, and therefore, what big difference? Why don't just be machmer? Of course not, because if what I'm separating now doesn't have a din of truma, then you have to take the ma'aser rishon off it. That which was given to the kohen is excluded from ma'aser rishon. Ma'aser rishon is only from what remained.
So in this case, giving too much is a problem.
Yeah. Umafresh mimenu hakoyin ma'aseris. So you gave it to the kohen, David. So now the kohen has to separate ma'aseris. Ma'aser rishon and give it to the Levi. And Ma'aser sheni, in other words, all of the other ma'aseris cannot be exempted from it. Now, Taram, here again, Taram, your kavanah was, I'm doing what the sage just said. But also, what does that mean, David? What's achaz? That's not enough. Because I have to separate 1 out of 60. 1 out of 61 is lesser than the shear. Hareza truma. And now I can add again. And here the part is that the second separation is not mochayv and ma'aser, because that was in the fulfillment of my original 60. Very good. Clearly. Now, we said before that you don't separate truma by estimation. This addition you have to measure. I mean, you separate all my best. Why do you have to measure it? You're kidding me? How are you going to make that difference up? We also said if you add more, then if you plan to give 10%, that's fine. But if you plan to give kashir chachamim and you gave more on that addition, the coin has to separate ma'aseris. So now when you are almost by the goal and you have to just make that little amount, but you can't go over it, now you have to use measurements. But now the Rambam is introducing the adin, mukaf means that whenever you are separating trumas or ma'aser, so obviously if you have a box or a pile and you're separating from the pile for the pile, that's great. What happens if you have 2 piles? Can I say, we'll see, many times I could, that if it's the same product and it belongs to the same owner, it has the same level of obligation, as long as it's min hamukav, halachically together, we'll see what that means halachically, then I can say from this pile nothing, but I'm going to separate, let's say 4% from the other pile. So you're making another separation. Make sure that you have the min hamukav covered, and we're going to see soon again more min hamukav. They're in the same area. Halacha zayin. Okay. Hamafresh mixas hatruma. In other words, you intend to separate, let's say you're debating, and you separated some of that. That means from the outset, you know that you need to add. Since you know from the outset you need to add, prior to you adding, before, we just learned before, before in halacha vav, is that I wanted to separate, let's say 1 out of 60. When I separated, there was 1 from 61. No one knows that. There it is truma, even though I have to add, because when I separated, I knew that's it. Here, when I know that my action is not yet, that's the key in halacha zayin. Like what would happen, David, if I have a pile? I'm not separating tithings. I'm making mini piles. Just because I made a mini pile, different piles, garnished. That's what it is. Alpha became sorich lahafresh truma Trumas oisa mixas mimenu. Now, if I'm changing my mind and I'm saying I don't want for this to be truma and to add to it. No, this is like a mini pile. If I want to separate truma, it has to be dafker from this pile and not minamukav. Even though it's minamukav.
What's the point of Dalit?
Let's not go backwards. Let's speak about it like Pasha, but it's 10 more minutes. He said, halacha ches. Hamafresh mixes truma mikri zem. All right. Umixas and truma mikri achar miminoi. Now that we established in Zion that when you did various steps of separation, even though when you know from the outset it's not enough, from the outset it's not truma, but now we're not allowed to separate from another pile. So and truma kri hazel toichel. Okay, now when you designate truma, you can make a verbal declaration, and sometimes that will be suffice, that will be enough. When you say that the truma is going to be in the northern part of the scale or of the spile, or in the south, cut a shame. The chayiv lahaflim truma im leitzim akoyim elayim aklum. Notice once we said that when you make a partial designation, there's no more min hamukav. If you did not say we're in the north, then you did mamish nothing, and you still can take off min hamukav. Halacha nine. Omar trumas hakriza trumas hakriza. Number one, and you were caught ashamed. In other words, you gave the from this pile that which is in that corner, in that location is truma. And then you said, and from this pile it's the same. What did you mean by the same? That the truma should be from the same location of the pile. Trumas ma'aser. Unlike Truma Gedolah, that should not be given generally precise. It must be given by estimation. Unlike that, is Trumas Ma'aser, that which either the Levi or the original owner will separate from the Ma'aser. And even Bisman Hazeh, it's Tamei, doesn't matter. Or Midrabanan, when the Torah faket, the reishis means no shear. That's why we remember that, but at least doing it ba'omet. Torah says ma'aser and ama'aser, that's a shear. Davar shadar ken yimadid moedet. Davar shanish kol shoykel. The davar she'efshel lim noisei moina. What happens if it's a product that all three can be done? Efshel lim noisei l'shoykel l'madadoi. So first of all, counting is the least. It's good. Even better than that is moedet. And interestingly, the greatest way of getting the closest measurement is weighing something when it comes to trumas u'maises. Halacha yud beis. Mitzvahs trumas maiser is sheyafresh oisa ben levi mi maiser. You give 10% after the truma gedolah, only from what remained you give to the Levi. The mitzvah is that the Levi takes his 10% and he exactly measures 10% from it and gives it. That goes to the Levi, and he is mafresh. However, do you know that normally if I chop your mitzvah, I get penalized? We don't apply this over here. Here, if the original owner decides, I want to do the mitzvah of maisim and amaisim, I separated the 10% for the Levi. Prior to me getting it to the Levi, the owner, I'm going to separate 10% from it. If I did it, it's effective, and I'm allowed to do it. And we don't say, ooh, I took away the mitzvah from the Levi. And then he only gives the meiser to the Levi. Achar, that the original owner was mafresh truma, which is meiser min ha-meiser. And he tells the Levi, it's already fully tight. Halacha yud gimel. Yisrael shehifresh meiser ishim, while it is still in the shibolim. Now, when are you obligated to separate tithings? Not only after the harvest, but after the gemar malach. Here, the person separated it prior to it being obligated. Not only did I give it prior to the obligation, but here I went out of order. In this case, now, even though had the owner done everything, then the Levi to begin with would have gotten less. Let me just go to my numbers. If I have 100, really I should have given two to the client. The Levi gets 10%. He doesn't get 10. He gets 9.8. If I gave to the Levi prior to separating Truma Gedolah, how much will the Levi get? He's going to get 10, not 9.8. So you can argue that the 0.2 is something that the Levi should give to the client prior to the Levi separating 10% from what he got. We don't say it over here. Why? Because since you gave it to the Levi prior to any obligation, now the Levi will always have to separate the Trumas Meiser, but not the Truma Gedoyla. Elo Trumas Meiser will what? But if the Yid did the Disha, it means he did everything. It's already the pile. Now, if the owner made a mistake and he gave 10% to the Levi first, the Hifrish Hamaisim and Adagam Kenu Shiatos Truma Gedoyla, and he gave it to the Levi, now the Levi has to give two things to the Kohen. First, the Levi has to give the Truma Gedoyla. The example that I gave, he's going to take from the 10 apples that he got, the Rambam it's Midai Raisa, and he's going to give 0.2 to the Kohen. Now he only has 9.8. And now from the 9.8, he gives 10%. Utrumas Meiser, and when does he give it? He gives it because is high between Gedoyla. As it says, Reshis the Ganchom, Halacha Yudal Ben Levi, Shalakach Meiser Shibolem. Now, should the Levi do it? No, he shouldn't have done it. You know why he did it? Because he knows that the Kohen will lose the Truma Gedoyla. So Lo Yitain Trumasai means Trumas Meiser to the Kohen while it is in stalks, but we penalize him. He's part of the reason why the Kohen is losing the Truma Gedoyla, and therefore you have to do all of the work in that which you have to give to the Kohen. However, now that he did the trampling, you know what you have at the end? You have the grain, but you also have straw, you have chaff. It's garnish, it's insignificant. If he already separated the Trumas Meiser, he separated that prior to him giving the Truma Gedoyla. Now, if you made the separation prior to you threshing it, and now you threshed it, well, now the chaff and the stubble already belongs to the Kohen. And again, like we mentioned, Halacha 15. Let's go moving. Ben Yisrael Shomer LeLevi. Kach Amar Li Abba. Meiser L'cha B'Yadi. Ein Choshen L'Trumas Meiser Shaboy. We presume that the father, the Yisrael, as he is allowed, took this mitzvah and already was mafresh the truma. And that's why he told the son, listen, tell the Levi that is yours. Meaning all of it is his. But if the father tells his son that, and he gives him a measure amount, why did he mention a koir? He mentioned a koir because he's being marames that I did not separate Trumas Meiser. And since we learned Trumas Meiser has to be given not by estimation, that's why he gave a measurement for the Levi to know exactly how much he's getting for him, to know exactly how much he has to give. Halacha 16, Trumas Meiser, Shoyaba Echad Mishmaina Bishminis. If all that is, don't forget, Trumas Meiser is basically 1% from what you started out with. So if that 1% at least amounts to the shear 1/8 of an eighth, then you have to bring it to the Kohen. It's chashuv. We're speaking about 1/8 of a loik. But if Trumas Meiser, which is a small, because it's a tenth, it's not even a tenth of a tenth, like I told you, because really Truma Gedoyla goes to the Kohen. So therefore, you have now 98. So you're giving 9.8, and then you're giving 0.98. It's less than 1%. If it doesn't amount to that amount, you don't have to bring it to the Kohen. But 1 second, it's holy. You destroy it. That's only if it's not a chashiva item. But the yayin of a shemen, I feel a kol shum alich l'koyin. Ubaldad shetei trumas meiser vadois utohira. Avol, if you know it's tamei, or if you have a doubt, ein ba kashir. And we say that since it doesn't even amount to this shmeina bashminis, where do we have the shir shmeina bashminis? They're in Slater, right? By the level of, I don't know, not self-esteem is important, arrogance. The amount of, by a person. Here we go, David. Now, this is important. Mukaf means that if I have 50 saw in this house and 50 saw of the same product in the other house, since they're not together, let's go, they're separated by houses. Houses many times in Chazal means rooms. Lo yafrish me'echad mehem tusa al hameya. I'm giving a bain in this. You can't do that. Because shenimsa mafresh mimakem amakem achen. But if you did it, even though you should not have done it, it is a fact of Truma Truma. As long as that which you separated is Shamur, and you see that they're breaking. And the Amr, and he says, why are you saying this? Because you know you're about to incur a loss. So you want to make the loss, the Kohen's loss, and this is here and that's there, that's already not effective. Look at Yudches. What happens if everything is in a room but it's not on a pile? You have small kids or 8 o'clock and therefore everything is all over the place. Right? You have 2 piles in one house. That's called mukaf. What about sake tevua, sacks of grain, igule devela, these dried figs that were made into these circles, jugs of figs. Interestingly, Chazal said that barrels of wine, guys, a barrel of wine that's sealed is considered as if it is in its own domain. That's the rule. Before you seal the opening, then takef, it's in the same room. If you're gathering bundles of vegetables, bunches of vegetables, and you're putting them in your garden, guys, garden is not a house. Is that minamukah? So yes, in other words, we say that the garden means there's no roof, there's no walls. That's called together. But if this is separated by another type, right, and it's in a garden, that min David separates them. What happens if you have many types, but they are gathered in a box? It's all like this. Even though they are in a box, but since they are separated by another type of veggie, another thing. If you collected 5 piles in one granary, because however, then view then every pile are separate. Unlike Truma Gedoyla, remember this, Trumas Meiser can come Shalim and Amukah. As it says in Parshas Koirach, Mikoil Meiser Seichem. I don't care where they are, give Truma. Meaning, even Afilo Ma'aser Echad B'Medina, Zu, Meiser Echad in a Zu. The Levi owns some here and some in another country. Mafresh Truma Achas Ala Koil. However, Talmidei Chachamim ain't Talmid Element Amukav, even Trumas Meiser. Halacha Chaf Aleph Ben Levi. Right, he takes my sedisha, he has to separate it. You know what he says, David? I'm going to use all of this up. None of it, he's not going to separate from it for itself. He knows how much it is. He's constantly getting other mices, and he knows the exact amount. Now I'm using up this for that until it's fully used up. Even though all of it is becoming truma.
So you leave a section just for truma, but you keep getting more.
More, very good. And even though when it comes to me separating truma gedoyla, I have to leave something for me. The Levi does not need to leave anything for him. Very good. If he did separate from the spile, trumas ma'aser, and now it's the leftover. Now it's the other 90%. No. If he does that, he does nothing. Because now it's already completely chulin. Similarly, that rule is universal. That if the original owner, also what could be used for trumais? Something that's tevel, something that has the same level of chiyuv. Sarech sheyu tvalim the truma. But the imenicham liyos mafresh leim meiser sarech liyem truma gevaldik. What can be separated if something itself is mechuyev? Halacha chav gimel kishem mafrishin truma so meiser is mafrishin oisei Allah seder. What's the seder, guys? Here the Rambam brings back bikurim. First bikurim, then truma gedoyel, then meiser ishin, then Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani. And however, if you went out of the order, or if you separated Meiser before Truma, or if you separated Truma before Bikurim, that you violated the negative commandment for going out of the order, nevertheless, and what's the negative commandment? Where do you have this? Parshas Mishpatim. Means don't delay. Chazal say it doesn't mean don't delay to give it. Okay, maybe because it's a lav shavachlolos. Final halacha chavdalit. Haretz alav l'shum gedolim. Utrumas meiser ki echad, which we said the original Jew is allowed to do. Maflish echad mishleish or shleish mishleish. Guys, it's 300. It makes a lot of sense. If I have to give 2%, what is that? What's that called? 2 from 100. What's trumas meiser? 1%. 10% of 10%. That's a third 100. So I can separate those three. But we learned I have to go in the right order. So how do I verbalize it to make sure that I did it on the right seder? So this is what he says. He says, this one remains chulin. Note, you don't want this to be trumas meiser right away. First, you're saying only 2 of it. What did you do now? Truma. What comes afterwards? Not trumas meiser, now meiser. So now you say, even though you didn't physically separate it, but you gave its location. And now, now that's trumas meiser ala koil. By wording it that way, so you separated truma gedola, then you designated meiser, then you designated trumas meiser, even though physically, my friends, you took out 300s at the same time, you did it in the right order.